stream. Let's see. There we go. Check, check, mic check for the stream. Testing.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Keith Miller with the Greater San Diego ALS Association chapter. Welcome to our monthly care services meeting. A couple of quick announcements before we start. Set aside the date, April 1st, April Fool's Day. Check our website, call the chapter. We're going on a flagship cruise downtown, so you want to make sure you're included in that. And the next big date is May 8th for the USS Midway event that we do every year. So a couple of dates to remind you with. Of course, we have a support group meeting this Saturday at Ability Center. Okay, with that, I'm going to introduce Jessica from the Southern Caregiver Resource Center, who will introduce our speaker.
Our speaker today is Maricela Gomez. She is the community educator for Southern Caregiver Resource Center. She holds a bachelor's degree in political economy from UC Berkeley and a master's of public health degree from UCLA. She is currently pursuing a master's of social work degree at USC. As a community educator, she provides educational presentations on a broad range of topics aimed at helping family caregivers throughout their caregiving journey. Her extensive professional community experience and educational background provides her with the necessary tools to fulfill her passion for helping others.
Hello everyone here, and also hello to everyone who's watching at home. So today we are going to talk about caring for the caregiver. I was asked to give this presentation, and I feel like this is a very important topic that it's important to discuss and really understand the world of caregiving. Okay, so I wanted to first start with our objectives for today, and what are some of those topics and themes that we want to touch on. And one thing I do want to say is that I really enjoy interaction, and I know for those of you who are watching at home, it'll be maybe a little difficult, but I do want you to take the time to really ponder some of those questions that I'll be asking throughout this presentation. So with that, our first objective that we're going to have here is we want to identify and really learn to manage your caregiving responsibilities, which I know are probably a lot of responsibilities, right? The next objective is really trying to learn ways to improve communication with others. And our last objective will be to learn ways to stay organized and how to ask for help. Okay, so those are some of the main aspects that we're going to touch on. And again, please, ask questions and let me know what you're thinking in terms of some of the things that we're going to talk about. I did want to start with this great quote here. I always love to share this quote during my presentations. And sometimes some individuals know who it is, but most of the time they don't. So I'm going to ask you if you know who said this quote, but firstly, I do want to say it. There are 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who currently are caregivers, and those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers, right? So there's a lot of caregiving in this world. In some way or another, we're going to touch this aspect of caregiving. I know from personal experience, I've been a caregiver for my mother, and I still am a caregiver for her. She's elderly. She's losing her eyesight and her hearing, and I really try to help her out with things at home. Whether it is that I am a long distance caregiver and I'm not there every day, I still consider myself to be a caregiver. So back to the quote. So does anyone here know who said this quote? Anyone? Anyone at home? It was actually former First Lady Rosalynn Carter. She is very active in helping family caregivers with her organization, the Rosalynn Carter Institute, and I encourage you all to look into that, resources for family caregivers as well. I did want to also touch on some statistics here regarding family caregivers. Here we see that approximately 43.5 million caregivers have provided unpaid care to an adult or child in the last 12 months. That is a lot of caregivers, right? And one thing that's important here is that this is unpaid care. How much are you getting paid for taking care of your loved one? Most of the time, you're not, right? Another statistic here is that about 34.2 million Americans have provided unpaid care to an adult age 50 or older in the last 12 months. So this kind of just gives us just some perspective of the world of caregiving and how important it is to really discuss this. And I know with my organization, Southern Caregiver Resource Center, it's one thing that we find is that it's challenging for people to really identify as caregivers. They don't see themselves as caregivers, and that's really an issue. Really, to first start, the first step is really to self-identify as a caregiver, to be able to understand what you need to do as a caregiver to, adapt to these new responsibilities, these challenges, and so that's just an idea of, the perspective of the caregiving world. And just one thing I do think it's important to kind of touch on is the population trend and the impact to caregiving. So as we know, life expectancy, today the average life expectancy in the U.S. at birth is approximately 78 to 79 years. If we look at the numbers in the past, in 1935, it was 62 years, right? And if we go further back, in the 1900s, it was 47 years old. How astonishing is that, right? Just how we're living longer, right? But with that, comes other challenges, and we'll touch on those in a bit. But I did want to ask the question of, just to throw it out there, why do you think we are living longer? What do you think are some of those factors that have really, contributed to this?
I'm assuming better eating habits.
That's definitely, better health care, absolutely.
Just better health care as well as the lifestyle.
Lifestyle, right? Yeah, absolutely. And
Education.
Education, yeah, so there's all these, factors that come into play. And I do think it's important to highlight, health care and the advances in, our public health system in terms of, having access to, immunizations, vaccinations. One thing that as I was doing research is understanding that also sanitation, right? back in the days, that was something that wasn't really, advanced at that time. But now through that, sanitation is a really big aspect to that as well. And then I just have this chart here just to give us a visual about, life expectancy and the rise of life expectancy. We see the upward trend, but then we do see a little outlier there if we see that dot all the way at the bottom. Does anyone know what that outlier is in the 1920s? Why life expectancy decreased at that time? Does anyone know? Not, you know what it is? The Spanish flu, actually. Do we know? I know some people, when I give this presentation, they know exactly what it is. And I'm like, how do you know that? I had to, do the research to find it out. So here we see this, and at the bottom, I did include some of the factors which we did talk about: antibiotics, immunization, and better sanitary conditions. So this is all just to put in perspective. Okay, so we're living longer. So what do we do with that? And how does that impact the life of caregivers? And well, obviously the biggest thing is that there's going to be a need for more family caregivers out there. So this is greatly going to impact this system, right? And one thing is that with hiring caregivers, hiring help, a lot of times people aren't able to afford that, right? So they have to be the ones to take on the responsibility of being that family caregiver. So there's going to be an increase in family caregivers as the years go by. So I do want to start off with the core aspect of the presentation and in understanding, asking you, are you a caregiver? Are there any caregivers here today? Yes? Yes? Yeah, I'll also raise my hand too, right? So definitely knowing that there are others out there who are also caregivers who are, here in the same room, at home. And so now looking at, okay, so what is a caregiver? So we identified as caregivers, right? So what is a caregiver? What is a caregiver to you? What are those words or those things that come to mind when you think about a caregiver?
I look at it as a support as far as what do you call it, to catch problems ahead of time.
To catch problems ahead of time. The support is big, right? Having someone, being that support for someone who, can't, maybe do certain things anymore. And support, emotionally, maybe physically, and those are things we'll touch on too. Anything else out there in terms of?
I would say helping someone else do something they can't do on their own.
Yeah, definitely. Something that they can't do on their own now. And, caregivers can be caregivers in various situations, right? Everyone has such a unique experience, a unique caregiving journey. Whether you're a caregiver taking care of, for my example, my elderly mother who isn't able to see as well anymore, or someone who's taking care of a loved one with cancer, someone who's taking care of someone with ALS, right? Someone who's taking care of someone with Parkinson's, with Alzheimer's. There's just various, medical conditions out there that, require that help, that extra assistance, that family caregiver to be there. So we did touch on what does that mean, and how do we know we are caregivers? And I think we kind of just touched on that as well, understanding that, well, I provide the support for my loved one. I have taken on the responsibility of, setting up appointments, taking my loved one to appointments. So there's all these different aspects, right, to really understand, okay, I am a caregiver because this is what I do. These are some of the things I do as a caregiver. So family caregivers, as we said, they could be spouses, they could be children, right? They could be children now taking care of their parents who are older adults now. They can be grandchildren, right? They can be friends, maybe in certain situations, maybe, an individual doesn't have that connection with family members and, maybe they have a close friend that, is able to take on that responsibility. So as I said, all caregiving situations are very different, and that should be definitely something that we should be mindful of, is understanding that the diversity of caregiving responsibilities and caregiving situations. Family caregivers are essentially people just like you and me. And now I want to get into the types of caregivers here, really honing in on the fact that there are, different types of caregivers. There are full-time caregivers, someone who's taking care of someone 24/7, so 24 hours a day, the whole week, right? Or part-time, maybe part-time can be going on the weekends, like sometimes I do go see my mother. She's actually in Rancho Cucamonga, which is like 2 hours away from here. Or long distance can also be, someone who is taking care of a loved one who's out of state, right? Maybe they travel 2 or 3 times a year to take care of their loved one, maybe get things in order and situated where they are. So again, such a different, situations out there. But one thing that, maybe that all maybe have in common is what? Maybe stress comes about, right? In certain challenging situations, maybe we see, that they are all experiencing a certain level of stress. And not to say that the full-time maybe is more stressed out in, caregiving situations, but also even long distance could be, equally stressed because maybe they're not there all the time to see their loved one, and maybe they're worried a lot, in terms of, oh, I'm not there, I can't be there to see that everything's okay. So stress is a big factor that I think it's important for caregivers to understand, and then from there address it and have the appropriate tools to, overcome it. So I have this picture here of someone, sorry, just to show, it's can be stressful, right? So here are some of those stressors that can impact your life as a caregiver, whether they be physical, whether they be emotional, financial, social. So we're going to go into all of these, and I want to hear your feedback and hear what are some of those physical, emotional, and so on, stressors that you experience in your role. And for those at home also, I would like for you to also just ponder and think about some of those, identify some of those physical stressors as well, and so on. So we'll first go into the physical. So in terms of physical stressors as a caregiver, can we think about some of those that maybe we've experienced? Are there any out there that you'd like to share in terms of what are some of those physical, like, stressors?
Say migraines.
Migraines.
Just trying to get migraines.
You get migraines? Yeah, I also get migraines as well. When the stress is just too much. Headaches, migraines, maybe changes in appetite, maybe loss in energy, changes in sleep habits, muscle pain. Okay, jumped too soon for that one. So muscle pain too. So in certain caregiving situations, it requires a lot of physical energy, right? Whether it is picking up that loved one from the bath, or putting your loved one in bed, and maybe the bed is too high, and just a lot of different things of having that physical stress, right? Or maybe taking the individual out of the car, and do caregivers get a handbook 101 to tell you exactly what to do in situations? No, right? You kind of got to learn and and find out, like, what are the best ways. So maybe for physical, I know there are classes out there. I know we have had some where it's, the training, to how to properly, pick someone up. So that's probably, digressing, but I do think it's important that, as a caregiver, to know that, you're not alone, and it's okay that you probably don't know the answer to something, but, it's constantly being like a researcher and trying to figure out, what do I do in this situation, right? So that we talked about physical stressors, and then so now emotional, right? This is a really big one in terms of caregiving. Are there any emotional stressors out there that you guys can think of in your situation, your caregiving situation?
In a caregiving role, I don't think there's time for me to be emotional, but when I get to that point, maybe I cry, or I'm upset for no reason, or at least it seems to.
Yeah, and you're not alone. There's a lot of caregivers who, go through those emotions, and, having to deal with certain changes in their life that, they never, anticipated. And so it's obvious that, that emotional, stress is going to happen, right? And so maybe there's also anger, that, why is this happening to us? Why, what did I do wrong, right? And that's obviously something that we don't want caregivers to feel. Sadness, crying outburst, irritability, mood swings, anxiety. Also, there's depression. I know I've read a lot about caregivers falling into depression. And so, again, we're going to look at, how to address this and, have that toolkit of things that we can do to, combat this stuff that, naturally, can occur as a caregiver. Emptiness. So these are just some of those emotional stressors, inability to concentrate. What about financial? Does being a caregiver cause you financial stressors? Are there situations that require us to maybe, spend money on maybe assistive technology or medical bills or, different aspects that as a caregiver, we have to consider, and with that, I'm sure there are programs out there that can, assist and help to, maybe cover some of the cost of these equipments that can be kind of pretty expensive out there. Medication costs can be high. In terms of financial too, I know when we talk about caregivers, we talk about how as caregivers we put on multiple hats, right? Different, as if we have different jobs, right? We're financial planners, we're chefs, maybe we cook, right? We're chauffeurs, what else can we say? Any other ones? Am I missing some? I know there's a lot of.
If you have a bigger family, sometimes referees.
Referees to referee families with 3 children. Yeah, that's another thing, right? Is family dynamics, right? That's another aspect too. But as a caregiver, you put on all these multiple hats and different responsibilities. And so in financial, maybe now you have to take on the role of paying the bills and, coordinating all that aspect that maybe you didn't do before. So social. What about social? What are some of those social stressors that are common? Maybe you've experienced them for caregivers. What has caregiving maybe, has it affected your social life? Is there something, what are some of those stressors out there? Yes.
It's gone.
It's gone. There's no social life. And yes, that's very common as in a family caregiver role, they step back and because of the responsibilities, right? They get invited to different get-togethers, and maybe they say, no, I can't go. I have to take my mother to her appointment, and so then maybe they ask again a week later, and maybe you have something else, right? And so then as that happens, what do you think is going to happen at that point, right? Do you think they're going to ask you again? No.
Probably not.
Probably not, right? And unfortunately, this happens a lot in, as a caregiver, you're kind of put in this position to, retreat from that social life that you had. And that's something that we highly try to, avoid with some of those tools we want to implement that we'll talk about soon. So in this slide here, we have maybe even just problems with partner or children. I know you mentioned refereeing and family dynamics being affected, right? Also irritability. Maybe you're just so irritable and so frustrated regarding your maybe you're experiencing certain issues regarding your caregiving, and you're irritable. And do people want to be around an irritable person? You know, so yes.
Yeah, particularly in our community,
Yes.
the continuing changing needs.
Yes.
You know, there is no new now. It's always changing. And that can be a real struggle for caregivers. They think they got everything under control, and now something changed and there's something else they have to do.
That's a really good point that you bring up. Yes, the progression, and there's no, I guess they don't tell you this is what you'll be expecting in a month from now. This is what you'll be expecting in 4 months from now. So this is what you can do to prepare. And so no, there's nothing like that, right? And so it is trying to adapt and figure it out along the way, right? And that's definitely something that's super challenging for caregivers. So thank you for bringing that up. So these are just some other ones. Loss of control, maybe that can relate to, you know, not feeling in control of, you know, this progression and what's happening. Also isolation, as we talked about, resentment, you know, resentment towards even maybe that loved one you're taking care of, loss of interest, you know. These are just some of those social stressors that, you know, caregivers can experience. So, okay, so let's say, you know, so you're a caregiver. So now what? What can I do? You know, we talked about all this, you know, emotional, financial, you know, we kind of vented a little bit about, you know, what those stressors are. So, but okay. So now what? What can we do from here? Just kind of touching on, you know, if you are a new caregiver, or, you know, as you're adapting to maybe a condition that progresses and it's kind of feels new every time, right? Being a caregiver really does have its own language and timeline, right? And that's what we're discussing about how you constantly have to be like a researcher. You have to be up to date on things. And, you know, I'm sure you have your own life and responsibilities also, but you're also taking on the responsibility of someone else. And you're constantly having to, you know, be up to date, as I said, with what's going on, doing research about the condition, talking to doctors, talking to maybe individuals who have experienced similar situations as well. And so, you know, how can we adjust to this new normal? And so now I want to talk about that toolkit, that caregiver toolkit. I want everyone to have a caregiver toolkit that they can have with them all the time and take out those tools when it's necessary in certain situations. So we're going to touch on these aspects here. Number one here is increasing our knowledge, okay? And we'll dive deeper into this as we move forward. 2, identify those challenges in our particular caregiving situation. 3, ask for help, right? Learn how to ask for it is key, and we'll talk more about that. And lastly, number 4 here is taking care of yourself, right? So let's go ahead and start with developing this care plan, which is really our toolkit as a caregiver. So number 1, increasing your knowledge. Here it's really saying the more you understand about the caregiving situation, so whether it be the diagnosis, the condition, and the options, you know, the more likely you are to respond successfully to it, right? Doesn't that make sense, right? Knowing, you know, what ALS is, the progression of it, what have other people experienced, and how can I learn from that, right? So in terms of increasing your knowledge, does anyone here have some examples of maybe a creative or innovative way in which they've done this, or some kind of aspect that has really worked for them in terms of increasing your knowledge?
We had a good example because a couple months ago I didn't even know what ALS was, and I popped into the office with Keith.
With Keith here?
Set me up with a stack of information.
Information.
Yeah, and it goes from A to Z, but I'm up to probably C and D right now.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
also with the kids at home, or not at home, but
So are they also reading this information too? Yeah?
I'm sort of helping them along.
Help them along the way?
But it's education. It's educational, and
It
instead
is.
of going on Google and learning all kinds of different versions.
Yes.
That's a great handy. And
That's
they like it as well, and I give them a couple of
great.
sections of it. And we've completed the first phase of the UCSD program, and in that book, in that they included a section of the ALS handbook.
Oh,
So
great.
That's,
That's an excellent example, right, of you not knowing about ALS and then Keith here providing you that resource of knowledge. And now I'm sure you know a lot more than what you've known before. So I think that's great. That's a wonderful example. And you do bring up a nice point too about instead of Googling, with technology now and information out there, there's a lot of information and various sources, and maybe sometimes, it can be overwhelming, right? And I think that's a great example of you going to, Keith, who would have this information handy with specialization in ALS, and so I think that's great, a great example. Does anyone else have anything about increasing your knowledge?
I would say join a support group.
Yeah.
Caregivers.
Yeah. And so being in a support group, right, you're amongst peers who are in similar situations, and you're able to discuss, maybe some of the experiences that you've had, and maybe they're going through it now, and you can learn from them and see, oh, I should try what they did, and maybe it'll work for me. And so, absolutely, I think this is a really crucial and important part to our care plan. Yes.
So just to a short plug,
Mm-hmm.
our third Saturday support group meetings include breakout sessions
Great.
where the individuals with ALS stay in a circle and the caregivers go in a different room and hash out their concerns or issues or ask questions and get to know each other and network. So that's the
Nice.
purpose of that.
I think that's a great environment, and to put the caregivers and the ALS patients together. I think that's wonderful. Absolutely. So increase your knowledge, right? So this is our first one, and now we'll move on to number 2, which is identify the challenges. So I like this question here because it's pretty, clear and simple. So if I cannot identify the problem, how can I come up with the solution, right? If we're unable to identify what that challenge is that we're facing, we know that there's something that's stressing us out, but can we really pinpoint what it is? What is that challenge? What is it? And then therefore, that's when you're able to, assess, what are some solutions that can, address this. So definitely this is a great tool to have. So identifying those challenges in our particular caregiving situation. So with that, I did just want to explain that there's an exercise that we like to, do in terms of, identifying those challenges and those maybe those responsibilities that, inflict those kind of challenges in our lives. And I passed out a sheet to everyone. I know at home you're not able to see it, but this needs assessment is essentially us identifying some of the responsibilities that we have as caregivers, and what maybe it's something that's really challenging to us right now in our current caregiving situation. For example, I have put here an example of meal preparation. Maybe this has been a challenge for you as well, or cleaning. Maybe you just don't have time to clean. And maybe laundry. Maybe you don't have time to wash clothes as often as you'd like. So that's just some examples here. But if you wanted to take maybe a minute just to kind of write down maybe a few of those needs that you have. Maybe you have so much on your plate that it's it's piled up high and it's overflowing the plate. And so what can I identify in my life right now that I could maybe use some help for that. So at home too, if you can just think, write down maybe 1, 2 that are really on your mind in terms of, oh, if I had someone to help me with this and this, that would really relieve some of the stress in my life. So with that, I know I see people jotting things down. Does anyone want to share maybe one of the things that they've discussed?
I go first? Okay. So I am a caregiver for my grandparents, and I think for me that I work full-time and I go to school full-time, it would be really helpful to have someone to drive him over to the appointments, and then maybe I could just meet them there, and otherwise I have to go home and then go to the appointment and then bring him back. So maybe just having that will be my urgent need at this point.
Okay, yeah, definitely. What about you, Chuck? Any? I see you've written down quite a few there. Oh, you got okay.
Is that not okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
No, the meal, cleaning, and laundry, those are my 3.
Those are your 3, yes?
3 big ones, because up until now, my wife was the primary home provider as far as meals, cleaning, and laundry, but I'm getting to be pretty good at it myself.
Okay.
But one I put down was scheduling time, and this one I think is important too, is friends and social, still keeping the social aspects as much as you can.
Right.
Both of them go together, the scheduling time and social endeavors for my wife.
Yeah, I think that's very important. Yeah, those are good. So yeah, identifying that you're able to identify that these are things that, I would need in my life, right? So with that, it's really, understanding that, we do need, yes, please.
Another one that we see our family struggle with is shopping.
Shopping,
And a lot of times they don't have the volume of purchases to utilize like grocery home delivery, where unless you spend so many dollars, it's pretty expensive to get that home delivery.
Yeah.
If you got a big family, it's easy. You're spending
Right.
that anyhow. But that's something that is an issue, and also something that sometimes when people ask, how can I help? You have a ready answer. Yeah, here's the list. Can you go to Vaughn's or Albertsons or whatever and get this stuff for me?
Absolutely, and that's where this is going in terms of identifying those needs, and then, now you know what it is that if someone comes to you, that's exactly what I was going to say. So I know it's okay, it's perfect, because that's where it leads to, right? Is having if someone offers help, take it and be clear. You know exactly what it is that you need help with, right? And also maybe, I know you mentioned the home delivery in terms of shopping, groceries, and for I know in certain situations maybe it does help that there's all these new delivery services out there. Also, I know in one of the presentations I had, a caregiver said, I really enjoy Uber Eats because I'm able to order the food for, my mother, and, it'll be delivered, right? And then in terms of maybe rides and stuff, looking into, hey, maybe I can utilize Lyft or Uber. You don't have to be there physically to, provide that service. For meal preparation, I know a lot of individuals look into Meals on Wheels as an alternative to, having certain meals delivered as well. So So definitely please keep these in mind, and yes,
Many churches,
and
particularly,
churches too.
can also have temporary or long-term meal assistance.
Right.
And let me tell you, some of that food is excellent.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot out there, right? And I know it takes time and energy to, find them, connect with those, individuals who maybe can help you. But in the long run, it really is a relief for you, So, so that's our needs assessment exercise. I hope those at home were able to identify some of those needs that they have and really start to think about, when someone offers that help or, asking for the help, which we'll get into as well right now. So our third tool here in our care plan is learning to ask for help. So really, who can you call in case of an emergency? Do you have that person in mind? Do you know who that is? Prioritizing, really prioritizing what is most important and how you can ask someone to help you with that. As the list, maybe your top one can be your priority, and seeking advice, whether it is, as we mentioned, support groups or organizations with educators out there who have that vast knowledge and resources for you, a case manager, and essentially having a support network, having a support system in place is important. And this is an issue we come across a lot, is how caregivers feel like they are the only one who can do a certain thing, right? We bring up an example of, I am the only one who can make coffee the way my mother likes it, so I am gonna make it. No one else can do it, So, but really, it doesn't. We can take a step back and realize maybe there are some things out there that others can do, and like I said, this is really to help you. So learning to ask for help can be difficult. I know some of those reasons that people don't ask for help is the fear of rejection. But I always say, if you ask someone for help and they say, oh no, I'm sorry, I can't. Or maybe somebody who has continuously offered, hey, anytime you need help, please let me know. And you ask them for help finally, right? And they say no, right? Well, at least now in case of an emergency, this person is not going to be anyone that you're going to reach out to, right? So essentially, having that support is important as a caregiver. It's okay to ask for help. And lastly, one of the very, very important aspects of all this is self-care, taking care of yourself. What are some things you all do to take care of yourself? What do you do for your self-care?
I try to go work out every morning before everyone else is going to need me for something else. But that doesn't always happen.
But it happens, right? You do make that time, and I think that's great that you set aside that time for yourself. Perfect. Anything you do for yourself, Chuck?
I think it's automatic because I get up early. And James gets up about 3 or 4 hours later, so I can get on the computer, answer mail, make emails.
Can you repeat it one more time, Chuck? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it's because I get up early. I have time slot in the morning. By early, I mean 5 o'clock, and she gets up at 7:38.
So you
I
have
get
some.
a lot of the personal stuff that's business out of the way and not have to worry about it till tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Cups.
Saying he enjoys his cups of coffee during this time. So yeah, so having that schedule, you have it like 2.5 hours of, time for yourself. Great. Anything you do, Keith, to take care of yourself? What is something for your self-care?
Comfort food.
Comfort food. All right. So, as long as it's something that you enjoy and it brings you happiness, and, that's the key here is your self-care. And self-care should not be, mistaken for selfishness, right? This is crucial part of caregiving, very important. It's a sacred part of it, and I think that a lot of people forget about themselves, and they get caught up in whatever is happening. But it's really important to do your appointments with your doctors. Take care of your own health, right? Because what we say is if you're not able to take care of yourself, like how can you possibly take care of someone else? And that is key here, is take care of yourself. And we know you're taking care of someone else, but be good mentally and physically to go facing these challenges. You'll be good mentally and physically, right? And it could be easier said than done sometimes. Maybe there's certain barriers that come into play, but it's definitely very important. And with that is our second exercise, which is our self-care checklist, right? And so that's also something that I would love for those who are at home watching, that take out a simple piece of paper, title it self-care checklist, and have at minimum maybe 4 things that you will do in terms of your self-care. So I know everyone has their sheet here, and maybe we can jot down maybe a few of those things that we will do for our self-care, whether it is scheduling 15 minutes every day, whether it is to sit in the car. I actually really enjoy just sitting in the car and just not doing anything, just taking a breather, right? Not having to think about school, work, anything, and just sit there. And maybe people around me will be like, what is this lady doing? But it's whatever, it's okay. It's my time. It's what I need to do to escape and be good. Whether it is to take also maybe 15 minutes to have a coffee break and go get a coffee by myself, so just things like that. It really is important also to think of the scheduling of it. Maybe put it in your phone alarm, oh, it's that time, my self-care, my space, my time, So I see some of the things. What are some of those things you guys have?
First one I said was try to keep a routine.
Try to keep a routine.
Because if you have a pattern and a routine, you're not disruptive.
Okay.
And the other one I said, for my relaxation, I guess, is listen to music.
Listening to music.
Turn the TV off to music.
Yes, absolutely. Music, whether it's relaxing music, definitely is something very therapeutic, right?
I would say schedule a hour-long bath once a week. But that's sometimes difficult because my grandpa lives with me, so that's not always possible.
Yeah.
But I think if I schedule it, maybe it'll happen.
Great. Yeah, that sounds nice. That sounds great.
Yeah, in some households you need a padlock for the.
A padlock.
Pet therapy.
Yes.
If you have a family pet, take the time you used to do to enjoy that relationship. Music is strong, pets are strong. You kind of know what your thing might have been before all this happened.
Mm-hmm.
Reach back and reconnect. And I love your 15 minutes in the car. Shut the cell phone off, shut the radio off. You got a good quiet car. It's awesome.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
and some folks will even take to mindfulness
Mindfulness,
classes or instruction.
meditation,
Meditation's a big
yoga.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are lots of things out there, and it's really
Yeah.
finding whatever fits you and whatever you enjoy, right?
Right.
Nobody can tell you, oh, you should do meditation. If it doesn't work for, if you cannot, meditation requires you to completely disconnect, right? And if you can't do it and you don't enjoy it, then it's probably not for you, and look into maybe something else that.
So put on your rock and roll or whatever your thing is.
And maybe
and
rock
enjoy
and
it.
roll, loud music is your thing, and it helps you, instead of that, nice, maybe classical, So we're all different people, and I think that's just something very important for us to remember, is taking care of ourselves and remembering how important we are, right? And here is just essentially what we've been saying is the best way to be an effective caregiver is to take care of yourself. And then just lastly, there's a document that I have as well that I'll pass around at the end of the presentation, which discusses, your Bill of Rights as a caregiver. Like these are just some of the examples. There's 10 here. I won't go through all of them, but these are just some of the examples of what it is in terms of what your rights are. Remember, you have rights as a caregiver. So here is, I have the right to take care of myself. This is not an act of selflessness. It will enable me to be a better caregiver. I have the right to seek help from others, even though the person I care for may object. I recognize the limits of my own endurance and strength. So I think it's important to have and to reflect on. And again, for those of you at home, I'm sorry that I can't give you the document, but I do believe that these can be accessed online as well. So just to end, I did just want to briefly just review some of the free services that my organization, Southern Caregiver Resource Center has. And these are for family caregivers who are taking care of someone who is 18 years or older with a cognitive impairment, or taking care of a loved one who's 60 years and older with who needs help with at least 2 daily activities, whether it be bathing, a ride to a doctor's appointment, and then from there, what happens is you would call our main line, which I will provide that information on the next slide, and you will be connected to a family consultant who is a professional licensed social worker, who will connect you to various services here that you would benefit from, that they see that you would benefit from in your caregiving situation. Each person has an individualized care plan, and these will be some of those services that they'll connect you to. Specialized information, what we talked about, access to information, short-term counseling, up to 6 one-hour sessions for free, legal, financial consultation, respite care for our clients as well. We have support groups, and education and training is what I do, and that's really one of the important aspects is understanding that there are a lot of workshops, information out there that we'll be able to help caregivers, especially caregivers for loved ones who are diagnosed with ALS. So unfortunately, we, in terms of qualification, there isn't, it's those who caregivers for the ALS would not qualify for the other services, but definitely it would be for education and training, which is what I do, so you'll get to hear me speak more. And also my coworkers will also be having those educational trainings as well. Employee resources, we also have a Reach to Caregivers Calma program, which is for individuals who are taking care of loved ones with memory loss. These are classes which are evidence-based. And our Operation Family Caregiver program for military and veteran family caregivers who are taking care of someone with TBI, traumatic brain injury, or PTSD, or physical disability. And this program is really catered to those families and their circumstances in their caregiver role. So we are here for the caregivers, and we are here to be that support system. So please reach out to us, and please do the exercises at home for those of you who weren't here, and reach out to us for help. And thank you for having me here today. Are there any questions? Is there anything that was left pending that wasn't addressed? Or
Maybe you could speak to a hot topic for some
yeah,
families.
sure.
The pressure from other family members or
Yes.
friends who pop in once in a while and second guess everything that's going on. You want to speak to that just for a little bit? It happens all the time.
I have heard about that, definitely. So family dynamics, right? I think that's a whole other presentation as well. Is really discussing family dynamics, and and I've heard that a lot, where family members who are not involved and who don't see things that are happening every day, and maybe it's a holidays and they come and they see that there are things going on that they were unaware of, and they want things to go another way, and you've been dealing maybe with things, so it really takes, I think, communication is important here in this particular situation. In terms of controlling other people and their actions and emotions, it's really hard to do, and it's really understanding that perhaps you can't control this other person, but you can communicate to them and say, if you want to have something to say, you need to be more involved, and you need to, maybe go with me to the appointment, or, be more involved, and then you can have a say. But right now it's my responsibility. I'm the caregiver, and
That's excellent.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
great.
people need to know it's okay to say that. you know?
Yeah.
It is. So we're blessed here in San Diego
Yes.
with Sharp and Scripps and Kaiser. There are numerous, and depending on your health care plan, oftentimes free, caregiver training for various things, like using a Hoyer lift, or general caregiving, specific caregiving to certain conditions or diseases. So we try and post those offerings frequently. If people want to know what's coming up next month, give us a call. We'll track it down for you. Sometimes we'll have caregiving training ourselves in our Living with ALS display room from time to time. Another resource that we have is called Care Connection.
Yes, I
Yeah, I
actually,
thought you might.
I was going to try to bring it over to you. It slipped my
No
mind, but I
worries.
did see
Yeah,
that.
so
Care
for those that are
Connection.
high tech and, want to set up a personal care plan calendar, we have a tool that lets you do that. And it's a private, it's by invitation. You can add other family members. And then you just put out there, hey, Thursdays from, 11 to 1, Mom would love a visitor. Sign up here, and then people can sign up, and the person managing it can say, oh, we have a gap, or hey, we're good for a week. So it's just a tool. Other people do it their own way, which is fine. Just wanted to let you know it's out there as a resource. And ask, talk to other people. This presentation is great, just to get people to understand it's okay not to know. It's okay to get help.
Absolutely.
And then, like you were saying, have your wish list. So when someone does offer, it's ready-made. Here, this is what I need.
Let me think
And-
about it,
Yeah, and then,
It's there.
and then you find out if they're real or not, or what their situation is. So, thank you very much.
Yes, thank
We
you,
really
Keith, for
appreciate it.
having
And
us.
everybody, please, great resource right here in San
Definitely
Diego.
give us a call.
Terrific organization. We thank you for joining us periodically through the year. We'll have you guys back, I'm sure.
Great, yeah,
And we
absolutely.
appreciate everything you do.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
so that concludes our Care Services meeting. Thank you for joining us. questions to the chapter, or there you go. Alrighty, thank you.
Thank you.